We cannot afford to make the same mistakes with this epoch-defining technology that we've made with the internet and with software and with social media. AI, which is going to be the most powerful technology and the most powerful weapon of our time, must be built with security and safety in mind. Our foreign adversaries remain intent on interfering in our elections to undermine American confidence in the integrity of our elections, to sow partisan discord. And those efforts will absolutely be exacerbated by the use of generative AI capabilities.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you know who I am, but I want to introduce our next speaker, Jen Easterly, the director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA, which is part of Homeland Security, but really is increasingly an independent operation. Jen Easterly, like General Milley, is an American original. She's a graduate of West Point. She's a Rhodes Scholar. She served with NSA in Iraq and Afghanistan. She's just extraordinary record of service. We're really pleased to have you here.
Thanks
for coming.
Great to be here.
So I want to begin with, as I did with General Milley, the big picture, and ask you, as you think from your perspective running our cybersecurity agency, what is the effect that AI will have both in cyber defense, protecting our country, and in cyber offense as this technology rolls forward and is applied?
Yeah. Well, great to be with you. I guess we're the closers. We're before the reception, so let's make this fun. You know, at the end of the day, we've been using AI in the form of machine learning for a long time in cybersecurity. And so given all of the work that's happening now with generative AI and large language models, we're basically looking to leverage them to upgun the capabilities that we've already been using. And because, you know, our role is as the civilian cyber defense agency, we've been very focused on using AI specifically to be able to detect malicious activity as it comes to federal government networks, but then using that as a pilot for attacks against critical infrastructure. So we're excited about the potential for that. We just ran a pilot around it. It was not groundbreaking in terms of what we discovered, that these capabilities were not going to solve the problem of cyber defense, but that they were augmenting capabilities that we already have in place. But I think it's important to remember, David, that, like, frankly, despite all of the progress over the past year and a half with respect to large language models and generative AI, we're still in pretty early days. So we have not yet seen the incredible breakthroughs that I think we will see that will help us on the cyber defense side. We've not yet seen the breakthroughs that our adversaries will use on the offensive side. But all that said, even though it's early days, these capabilities are moving incredibly quickly. In some ways, they are unpredictable. And so what we are trying to do is optimize the power of the capabilities, but also, very importantly, as the security team, to mitigate the potential risks.
So I want to ask you the same question that I asked General Milley about offense versus defense. I sometimes think that as you apply AI and the ability to look into your adversaries' networks and see early signs that you can predict, given machine learning and everything you know, that the defense may be super powerful. But I'm curious whether, A, whether you think that's likely in the future, and B, whether you're actually seeing some of that now.
Yeah, I really think the jury is out. You know, there is a school of people who will say this will solve the cybersecurity problem. I think there are really interesting things that AI capabilities can do for cybersecurity. There are others who will say, it will be, the old saying is the defenders have to be right all the time. Those on the attack only need to be right once. It will be amplified by an order of magnitude with AI. I don't necessarily subscribe to either school. And as I said, I think the jury's a bit out. What I do, just to give you my framing as I think about this, David, is AI is a form of technology. And the reason why I've been so focused on the security element of that is you look back on the past 40 years. If we go back to 1983, which is a year that you remember well, because I think that was the start of your career as a novelist after the embassy bombing in Beirut. Well, interestingly, 1983 is also the year that TCP/IP, and I think Maria Ressa mentioned Vint Cerf, was implemented to allow computers to talk to each other. And if you talk to the early inventors of the internet and any of the security pioneers, they will all tell you that none of this technology was developed with security in mind. Right? Dan Kaminsky, who's a famous late security pioneer, said the internet was invented to move pictures of cats, and it's very good at moving pictures of cats. House cats, I guess, is what Mark Milley would say.
Elon's house cats.
But it was never created with security in mind. And to be frank, it's why we have an internet that is full of viruses, why we have software that is full of vulnerabilities, why we have social media full of disinformation, and why anybody who cares about security issues is very, very focused on ensuring that the AI capabilities that are being developed in a way that security is the top priority, not speed to market, not cool features, because these capabilities are so strong and so powerful. You just heard General Milley say these will be the most powerful weapons of our time. And at the end of the day, you look back at the most powerful weapons of the last century, they were built and safeguarded by governments that were disincentivized to use them. These capabilities are being built by industry that at the end of the day are fiduciarily responsible to provide value for shareholders. So this is a more difficult problem, and it's one that we need to be able to work very closely between government and industry to ensure that we can optimize the power of these capabilities, but also avoid the failure of imagination that we may suffer if these capabilities gets into the hands of rogue nations or cyber criminals or terrorists.
So I want to ask you to evaluate for us the AI capability of our near-peer competitor, China. In the last year, 2 years, we've seen this extraordinary explosion of large language models doing things that just are dazzling. And it looks like the United States has a significant lead in that technology. But I'd be interested in your evaluation of where China is, areas in technology broadly where they're equal or ahead of us. Yeah. But in general, what kind of competitor are they?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I'd say the big difference right now is China puts much greater restrictions on their capabilities than we do here in the US. It goes back to my point. There has never been any guardrails put around technology because what I think is a bit of a myth that if you did regulate technology in any way, then you would stifle innovation. I do think it is possible to have responsible innovation. And I think some of the arguments around the fact that Europe doesn't have big tech companies because of all of their regulation, I just don't really buy that. Like at the end of the day, we need to ensure that we can actually work with China and work with Europe and work with other countries to figure out how we can control these technologies so that we can protect our population. So, I worry a lot about China's cyber capabilities, but right now, without AI, they are creating enormous risk to our critical infrastructure. I've talked about this publicly, but it is worth reinforcing the fact that the threat from Chinese cyber actors, colloquially known as Volt Typhoon, it has changed in kind, David. I've been doing this for a long time, and for years we talked about intellectual property theft and espionage and data theft, and now we're talking about Chinese cyber actors pre-positioning inside our critical infrastructure, not for espionage, but to launch disruptive or destructive attacks in the event of a major conflict or crisis in the Taiwan Straits. And that is happening right now. I am looking forward to being able to use AI to thwart attacks like that. But as we think about the power of some of these capabilities, there is a lot of damage that is being done without the added value of generative AI on top of it.
So just so our audience understands the importance of what you just said, the Chinese are pre-positioning these cyber weapons, in effect, inside, when we say critical infrastructure, that sounds so abstract. What are the examples of critical infrastructure where they'd be?
And to be clear, so what they're doing, and I don't want to get tech nerdy here, but they are essentially opening up doors within our critical infrastructure that they can then use to launch disruptive or destructive attacks.
Critical infrastructure is our electrical
Yeah, when you
grid.
say that, it does sound like a wonky term. At the end of the day, critical infrastructure is just how we get gas at the pump, food at the grocery store, money from the ATM. It's our water, it's our power, it's our healthcare, it's our education. It is just the networks and the systems and the data that power our daily lives. And it's all underpinned by a technology base. And the Chinese have very smartly seen that if they have a capability to do mass disruption, they can, their goals being, induce societal panic and chaos to deter our ability to marshal military might and citizen will in the event of a major conflict in the Taiwan Strait. So imagine this. This is really in a scenario where you have a war in Asia that's accompanied by mass disruption here in the US, the explosion of pipelines, the pollution of water facilities, the severing of our communication links, the derailing of our transportation nodes. So those are the things that we are critically focused on at CISA as we work to try and defend the nation and protect and defend our critical infrastructure. I will say one other thing that's just consonant with my point about technology, David. The Chinese cyber actors are extremely talented, extremely sophisticated. There are a huge number of investments that have been made over the past 10 years. All that said, the way that Chinese cyber actors are breaking into our critical infrastructure is not through exotic techniques. They are actually using the fact that there are defects and flaws in the technology that we use every day to be able to jump into our critical infrastructure. And that's why at CISA we've been so focused when we talk about technology, to including artificial intelligence, on ensuring that it is built and tested and deployed to be secure by design, meaning built to dramatically drive down the number of exploitable flaws that can be taken advantage of.
And you used the phrase, I interrupted you, that the Chinese are opening doors. Explain what that means.
It's a way to think about it. So essentially, when we talk about vulnerabilities, right? Vulnerabilities, you can think about that as glitches in the code. And those glitches in the code will allow malevolent, malicious actors to be able to break into your critical infrastructure and get a foothold. And they just keep that foothold open. They may test it every once in a while, which is one reason why they're very hard to find. We've had teams that have actually found them in multiple sectors: water, transportation, communication, aviation. We found them working very closely with private sector partners. We've eradicated them. But we think what we found to date across multiple critical infrastructure sectors is frankly the tip of the iceberg, which is why we've been so focused on working with technology manufacturers to ensure that they're creating safe tech, working with businesses large and small to make sure they're making the investments not only in cybersecurity, but in resilience, because it will be extraordinarily difficult to prevent mass disruption. What we have to do is ensure that we're building operational resilience, cyber resilience, and frankly, that we have the same societal resilience that the Ukrainians have shown since the full-scale invasion in early 2022.
Well, that's a super powerful description of the threats that are facing us. So as head of CISA, you're responsible, among many other things, for our election cybersecurity and our ability to detect and prevent attempts to manipulate our information space. And I want to ask you, in this presidential election year, what you're seeing, both in terms of attacks already by our potential adversaries, or as we near Election Day, additional attacks, whether you think we're vulnerable to that and what you're doing to prevent it.
Yeah. So thanks for asking. Just to take a step back, after 2016, with Russian attempts to influence the presidential election, election infrastructure was designated as critical infrastructure. So it was never critical infrastructure before. So it was designated as critical infrastructure, and CISA was designated as what's called the Sector Risk Management Agency, meaning that we work with state and local election officials who are on the front lines of administering, managing, and securing our election infrastructure. Now, over the past 7 years, and this is where the good news story comes in, CISA, in our role as the lead government agency working with the rest of the federal government, the intelligence community, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Justice, have worked hand in hand with election officials and vendors to make massive improvements in the security and resilience of our election infrastructure. And the infrastructure that underpins our elections, frankly, has never been more secure, and that election stakeholder community has never been stronger. And it's why elections were run in 2018 and 2022 and 2020. Those elections were secure. And just to be clear, there's no evidence that there were any malicious actors that altered, deleted, or changed any votes or had any material outcome of those elections. It's been validated time and again, including in multiple court challenges. And in any race that was close in 2020, there were paper records that were counted and recounted and audited to ensure accuracy. In this job, I have the privilege to spend a lot of time with chief election officials across the nation. And I know how tirelessly they work to ensure that every one of their citizens' votes are counted as cast. It's why I have confidence in the security of our election infrastructure and why the American people should as well. As you know, though, even though election infrastructure has never been more secure, the threat environment has never been more complex, starting with our foreign adversaries. If you read the recent annual threat assessment from the Director of National Intelligence, if you read the 2022 assessment of the midterm elections that came out, was declassified at the end of 2023. It's a good read. You'll know that our foreign adversaries, including China, Russia, Iran, but also more countries, are getting active in terms of malign influence and interference and disinformation. That has been going on for a while. We expect it to continue to go on. It is a persistent threat, and it will be exacerbated by generative AI capabilities. I will tell you, perhaps the more pernicious threat to elections are threats of violence to election officials, largely stemming from unfounded claims that the 2020 election did not represent the will of the American people. And these claims are corrosive to the foundations of our democracy. They've resulted in threats of harassment and violence to election officials and their families. And many election officials have resigned because of it. Those who remain often operate, frankly, in difficult conditions. And it's why we're so proud, and I've made it a top priority, to stand shoulder to shoulder with these election officials. And so we're working with them to do cybersecurity assessments, physical security assessments, exercises to be able to deal with cyber risk, with physical risk, with insider risk, and with the risk of foreign malign influence and disinformation. And so we have very aggressive efforts going on practically every day across the country, working over 8,800 jurisdictions to help make sure that election officials have the resources and the capabilities and the intelligence that they need to run secure elections. And again, it will be complex, but I have great confidence in the process.
So on the question of disinformation, at a Washington Post Live event last week, Ambassador Nate Fick, who's our State Department ambassador for
Good friend.
cybersecurity, a good friend of yours, I'm sure, for years, said that he has solid evidence that our adversaries have sought to deepen the polarization in this country over the war in Gaza. Sharp divisions are there. People have been trying to make those worse. Can you confirm that? And could you say a word about how we can protect ourselves against that attempt to inflame sentiment in the United States?
We can be certain that our foreign adversaries are taking every single opportunity, whether it's Gaza, whether it's the upcoming election, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's issues around China and Taiwan, taking every single opportunity to sow domestic discord and to further inflame partisan political divide, and to do everything they can to undermine our democracy. We can be absolutely sure that that's what they want to do. And frankly, in some ways, we are feeding into their strategy. And so we work very closely, in particular with election officials, to do a few things as they help, as they're dealing with disinformation. First, we work with the federal government to put out tactics that our foreign adversaries are using for malign influence and disinformation. We put out guidance around how generative AI can be used for influence and disinformation, and really what election officials need to do to deal with it. So that's one. Two, we are also using what we call our rumor versus reality website to put out accurate information about election security so the American people can understand why drop boxes are secure, how absentee ballots are secured. So essentially factual information about election infrastructure. Perhaps most importantly, David, what we do is we work to amplify the trusted voices of election officials, because they are the authoritative subject matter experts. And you know, one thing whenever I talk to any audiences, I say a couple things about elections. First off, know that election officials who are working hard every day to ensure that elections are secure, when you go to the polls, say thank you. Thank them, because they are out there in a difficult environment, and they're doing it not because they're getting paid a lot of money. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do for democracy. Second, if you have any questions about the security or integrity of the democratic process, please be part of the process. Sign up to be a poll worker, be an election observer. If you have questions, talk to your election official. It's a very transparent process, and election officials across the country want to have that discussion with their communities to talk about why the process is secure and all the technological, physical, procedural safeguards put in place to ensure that every citizen's vote is counted as cast. And frankly, to your point, David, we should not allow the adversaries to be successful in stoking partisan discord and tearing this country apart. We need to come together to deal with the very real threats, like Chinese intrusions in our critical infrastructure, like attempts to go against our power systems and our water systems. We need to come together and really defend our democracy.
So in this world of poisonous disinformation, as you just have described it, there's obviously a question about whether our social media companies should do more to moderate content, to screen it. We have an audience question from Kate Davis, who lives here in Washington, who asks, how, if at all, should content be labeled and verified for authenticity? How, if at all, should labeling be standardized and enforced? What do you think about that issue?
So at the Munich Security Forum, many of the generative AI and technology companies committed to voluntary steps that they would take to ensure that AI, for example, if there's a video created with AI of a campaign, that in fact there is labels around that. I do think efforts to ensure that anybody can tell whether a video is generated with AI capabilities, whether it's a deep fake, that is very important. And so the problem is, however, is there is no real teeth to these voluntary commitments. And so I know many of these companies are working hard to put processes in place. I frankly do not think that generative AI is going to fundamentally change the threats to this election. I think it will exacerbate, I think it will inflame them. I don't think it will change them. It would be very helpful. These companies would help identify whether some of these generated images and videos are created by AI or not, and I think there are efforts to do that through content provenance. But there needs to be a set of rules in place, ultimately legislation and regulation, and I know the Congress has put out a framework on this. There's the EU AI Act on it. But frankly, there needs to be safeguards put in place because these capabilities are incredibly powerful and they could be used in very harmful ways by malicious actors, by terrorists, by criminals, by rogue nations. I mean, you know, again, going back to your experience in the 80s with terrorism in the Middle East, you can I spent a lot of time in counterterrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was the head of counterterrorism at the National Security Council from 2013 to 2016. We always talked about Al-Qaeda's chief bomb maker, right? We were always looking for in Yemen, Ibrahim al-Asiri. Now think about Al-Qaeda's chief AI officer.
Oof.
Right?
What a frightening
Imagine that. And so, you know, you think about the bombing in Beirut, whether it's April or October, that was truck bombs. You know, these capabilities will be even more powerful. Now, I don't want to be labeled as a doomer coming out of this talk, because I really am a tech optimist. But I will say at the end of the day, these capabilities are so powerful, they will do amazing things, and I will stipulate that. But it is our responsibility to leverage the power of these tools and not suffer a failure of imagination in allowing our adversaries to use these tools in ways that will create unimaginable harm to populations around the world. We cannot allow these communities who ultimately are fiduciarily responsible to add value to shareholders, we can't allow them to continue to operate with complete impunity. We need to come together. We need to work with industry, with technology, with the generative AI companies to ensure that these amazing capabilities can be used safely and securely.
So we have less than a minute left. I want to ask you the same question we've been asking everybody. Who is on the top of Jen Easterly's reading list about AI that we ought to take a look at?
I mean, you know, I could give you a bunch of AI luminaries. I'm not going to do house cats. I feel like I take it in a different direction, David. I think we have to really look at history. I think we have to learn from the evolution and the history of technology, how technology has been used for good, how it's been used for evil, and really learn from examples about the optimization of technology, but also, again, the downsides. You know, less than 15 years ago, we were extolling moving fast and breaking things, right? We need to look back and see what got us to where we are, and we need to move forward informed by history and ethics, frankly, and values to ensure that what we are building, some amazing, amazing capabilities, we are building them in a way that will be safe and secure for the American people and for our allies around the world.
So, amen. I want to thank Jen Easterly, one of the amazing public servants. We're lucky to have her working. Thank you so much, Jen.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let me just invite you. You may hear in the other room the reception. We'd like to invite everybody to join our Washington Post colleagues, speakers, all of you at the reception. Thank you so much for coming today.